This is horrible, I hate this. Everything else about this I despise with a passion. This is so bad. This is so bad. Okay, there are lots of things wrong with this. Hi, I'm Honor Cargill-Martin. I am an ancient historian, and today I'm going to be looking at AI-generated images of ancient Roman life. I'm scared. Okay, a villa. Okay. Let's break this down. So I think here we are in the atrium of a pretty luxurious Roman villa. We can tell that because it's the main room. We've got some columns. We've got the kind of characteristic hole in the roof that you find in atria to let rainwater and light in. We've got some vaguely Roman, horrifyingly inhuman looking people. And we've got some pretty iffy decoration going on. Okay, so the general structure of this room is not horrifyingly inaccurate. It is this large central rectangular room. This would be the main reception room of the Roman house. There is this kind of sunken area in the middle called the impluvium, and that corresponds to an open area of the roof called the compluvium. And around that is a covered area, which here has some columns to decorate it. That's nice, that sometimes happened. There are also some elements of decoration here that are right. So we've got the walls decorated with wall paintings, which is very accurate. The content of the wall paintings, not so much, we'll get into that. And the floor is decorated with what looks like marble, which again is something that you certainly would find in Roman houses. And particularly this kind of multicolored use of marble is very characteristic of Rome, particularly from the sort of early imperial period onwards. These colored marbles come from all across the empire and are very expensive. So having lots of different colors of marble on show in the floor of your house demonstrates your wealth, but also the fact that you are part of this society that rules over the entire world and can use its resources to decorate their homes. In terms of what this gets less right, the size of the hole in the roof is bigger than I'm used to seeing in atria. The fact that you also get this kind of sunken area through most of the room is also not something that is generally characteristic. There's this sort of bowl-like bath thing in the center of the room, which there are some things, I suppose, that look quite like this that we find in Pompeii. You sometimes see kind of basins on tripods that are found in atria. But really what we'd be expecting to see in the center of the room here is a smaller sunken pool called the impluvium, which directly corresponds to the hole in the roof, the compluvium, and which catches the rainwater that falls in. So then onto the wall decoration. There are some things about this that the AI has actually got very right. So firstly, the fact that the surface of the wall is split into sort of parts and panels by decorative borders. That is something that we see in a lot of styles of Pompeian wall painting, particularly, for example, the fourth style is very characteristic of that. The rest of the decoration, however, looks to me deeply Renaissance. This kind of big grisile figure that you see by the door, that could be straight out of 1530s Mantua. You did get these kind of large-scale figurative paintings on walls, but then they are generally part of a sort of larger narrative scene, for example, a mythological scene. Other good things about this wall decoration are the use of color. Everything in Rome would have been incredibly colorful. Even the sort of pale marble statues that we see today would originally have been painted in bright colors. I also like the fact that they have this kind of fake painted on columns. This was something the Romans were very keen on. They loved kind of painting on fake architectural elements to sort of trick the eye. So you would have columns, you would have kind of perspective down colonnades that didn't exist. Another thing that I'm really struck by is how much foliage we've got going on. And in a way, this is right, and in a way, it's so wrong. I can't really imagine the Romans having ivy trained up their colonnades within their atrium. But the garden was a big part of the atrium because most Roman atriums opened out, sometimes with a kind of office space between, onto a peristyle garden, so a garden that is surrounded by a colonnade. So there is, in the Roman atrium, this sense of the kind of natural world coming inside, just perhaps not quite so literally as we find it in this image. Okay, so on to the next one. Okay, so we're in a bath. There seem to be modern pool ladders in the corner there. Not sure about that. This is not too horrible in certain ways. Okay, so what we've got going on is we have a sort of colonnaded room with a bath. It looks like, I think, a hot bath, potentially. I think I can see a bit of steam rising off it. In the center, some painted decorations on the walls, and these kind of decorative, again, colored marble columns. And we've got a group of men bathing. Things that it gets right: the general shape of the room, the fact that the baths were heated. And it's probably accurate that we do see kind of a group of men. It seems that in the bigger bathhouses, there were separate bathing spaces for men and for women. In the smaller bathhouses, maybe they were used at different times. And people did bathe together. Bathing was seen as a very social activity, a time to kind of catch up with friends, catch up on the latest news. They probably would have been naked, though. I'm not sure what's going on with this sort of strange belt that this man over here is wearing. The other thing that strikes me about this, apart from the horror of the pool ladder, is the decoration. So we've got this painted frieze at the top, but the decoration here is very messy. And I think AI has really clearly taken this from sort of surviving archaeological remains and then stuck a roof on it. In reality, bathhouses would generally have been incredibly beautifully and intricately decorated. Every one of these surfaces would have been painted or covered in marble, if you were in kind of one of the bigger, wealthier baths in the city, certainly. I suspect that to make this image, AI has mainly used surviving archaeological sites. And the reason I think that is because we're really good on the columns. We're good on certain aspects of the decoration, but it's very patchy. And then we have this strange sort of corrugated iron roof on top with these black metal crossbeams. And I think what it's taken this from is places where archaeological sites have been covered with temporary roofs to protect them. And that's why the walls are so much more exposed and the decoration is so much patchier than we would expect to see in a sort of proper reconstruction. Okay, we're in the Palaestra. Things seem to be going badly or well, depending on what team you're on. I'm not entirely sure what game they're meant to be playing here. Maybe some form of very violent ball game. We do know that the Romans played ball games. There is a ball game that is recorded called Harpentum, which does seem to have been pretty violent. I'm not entirely sure where these large boulders have come from. I would say, I'm trying to find something that's accurate. I guess the general structure of having a shaded colonnade surrounding a slightly more open area is what we do see in exercise grounds in the ancient world. It means that you can do your exercise out in the open and then you can come kind of cool off, relax in the shaded colonnade. I think it's also right that men would have been wearing potentially something like this to exercise. The Greek tradition of always exercising naked doesn't necessarily catch on quite so much in the Roman world. I also like the fact that this is clearly, a group activity. Men would go to the baths and then they would go to exercise grounds that were very often attached to them. And this would be part of their social life as much as of their sort of bodily care. I wonder about these kind of strange figures along the back, and I wonder whether those were meant to be statues. And that is something that we see in Palaestra. They are decorated with art. In terms of the activities that are going on, We can see some things that we definitely know did happen. So this pair over here seem to be boxing. I think this man down here is running in a strange and painful looking way. And these are, physical activities that we know the Romans engaged in. There were other activities on offer too. There was sort of discus throwing, people worked out with weights, there was wrestling. These are all men, and the Palaestra certainly does seem to have been a pretty male space. Women, however, did work out. There is a very famous and very incredible mosaic, for example, that shows a group of women playing ball games, working out with small weights, and they're wearing sort of bikini-like workout clothes. Okay, the Forum. I actually love this one. I think this is really well done. I think this really captures the fact that there is so much going on in the Roman Forum. So you have this monumental architecture all around you, but it's also used as a completely working space. So you have the markets over here, and you also have this man in the middle in his very white toga, which might suggest that he is a magistrate or a candidate for office. And so you would have had, at the same time as this commercial activity, you would have had a lot of public activity going on. You would have had politicians making speeches to the crowds. You would have had court hearings going on all the time, overlapping each other, people stopping to listen to one for a little while, shouting things at the judge. So just the sheer amount of noise and activity that you would have encountered in a Roman Forum would have been so overwhelming. And I think that this does capture that pretty well. Something I would say is some of these clothes I'm not so sure about. There seems to be a lot of loincloth wearing, which I don't know how I feel about. What I do like is the fact that there is also quite a lot of variation by the looks of things in kind of ethnic dress. So there looks like there's maybe a man here wearing more Greek style outfit, a pretty inaccurate one, but I think that is the sort of atmosphere they're going for. And so I do like the idea that this is a meeting place of people from all across the empire who have come to Rome to potentially petition the empire or the Senate, or to sightsee or to engage in trade. Also, the fact that this space is so crowded, I think does a really good job of showing the fact that the Forum is the complete center of Rome or any Roman city. This is the place that you come for all major commercial and public activity. It gets so crowded in Rome that under the empire, they keep having to build more and larger forums, kind of in addition to and off the original Forum Romanum. All of this activity is just happening in this incredible monumentalized space. So you have obviously temples everywhere. You have the Curia or the Senate House somewhere here. You've got a huge number as well of monumental statues, which are meant to commemorate the great heroes of Rome and so to inspire modern day Romans to emulate them. I also like the kind of general layout of this forum, the fact that there's some sense of the buildings kind of sloping up on hills on either side. The Forum in Rome is in a valley between some of Rome's major hills, and so you do get that sense when you're in it, which would have been magnified by the number of people, this kind of claustrophobic energy. Yeah, so look, some of these buildings in style are a little dodgy, some of the styles of dress are a little dodgy, but I think in energy, I actually really like this one. Okay, so, oh my God, okay, we're in the modern Colosseum. So AI has just taken photographs of the Colosseum and put some gladiators in part of it in the middle. This is horrible, I hate this. Even the people are not dressed like Romans. Oh my God. Okay, so what have we got going on the stage? We have got a pair of gladiators fighting, that's fine. And then we've got some gladiators fighting a lion. I quite like that. I think very often when we think about lions in the Colosseum, we associate them with just kind of being brought on to eat Christians, but actually much more commonly they're brought on for kind of beast fights or beast hunts. And they are, up against gladiators. Everything else about this I despise with a passion. Obviously, all of these ruins would have been covered with seating. They would have been marble seating in the lower areas and then wooden seating in the upper areas. And the very upper layers would have had awnings that could be pulled across in the sun. The stage would obviously have filled out the entire kind of central oval of the Colosseum, and it would have been raised up so that there was space underneath for beasts to be brought through, for prisoners to be brought through, for gladiators to be brought through. The seats just around the kind of central area, so the best seats in the house, would have been reserved for the imperial family, for dignitaries, for Vestal virgins. And the AI here has just directly taken the places where you have viewing platforms in the Colosseum today. So the kind of this portion of the arena, and then the first layer, and then there's a little kind of balcony at the top, and just place the spectators there. Yeah, so this captures, I think, none of the structure of the Colosseum, nor does it capture any of the atmosphere of it, because I think what's so crucial is this idea that these are banks and banks of the Roman people. You can look out across the Colosseum and feel like you are seeing almost a cross-section of Roman society because of this segregation of the seating areas. So richer people towards the bottom, poorer people towards the top. And all of these people are kind of combined to watch the same incredible spectacles. Okay, so, okay, this is more like it. We're now watching a chariot scene. So although we tend to think of gladiators now when we think of Rome, chariot racing was actually, I would say, more of an ancient Roman obsession. There were 4 major chariot racing teams in Rome: the Reds, the Whites, the Blues, and the Greens. And just like football teams today, people would have kind of die-hard allegiances to one of those teams. And we have even emperors who become very attached to certain racing teams. And there is sometimes rioting that breaks out between the adherents of different teams. And particularly, actually, as we move into the Eastern Roman Empire and the Byzantine world, chariot teams become very associated with different political factions. In terms of the actual layout of the chariot racing track, I'm less sure about this because it looks like it's kind of an almost F1-like track, kind of winding round. If we were looking at an ancient track, what we would have seen is essentially this very long, elongated, straightened oval. So you have these long, sections of straight track, and then these tight turns, and then you come round again, and like this. And on the long straight sections, it's where the chariots can really pick up speed, and then you have these tight hairpin turns where you get a huge number of very dramatic and often deadly chariot crashes. In terms of public spectacle at Rome, these are probably the biggest public spectacles. If you go to Rome now, you can visit the space where the Circus Maximus was. It is absolutely huge. It's just so much bigger than the space of the Colosseum. And the structure of the seating here, I don't despise. There was this kind of raised seating. I'm slightly confused as to why they seem to be coming around a triumphal arch. There is sculptural decoration on the central curb, I suppose, of the chariot track, but it's not triumphal arches like this. There are obelisks, there are statues. There also are not spectators in the sort of central portion. The spectators are all around the side. So in terms of the chariots themselves, these look like they are 2-horse chariots, although we've got some very, very strange things going on with the horses. One of the horses seems to be part chariot itself. Over here, there seems to be a horse with about 8 legs. Generally, chariot racing would have been either with 2 horses or with 4 horses. You would also have had, obviously, much more demarcation between which racers are racing for which teams. And in terms of the chariot racers themselves, this was an incredibly dangerous profession. Dying in a chariot crash, potentially being dragged behind your opponent's chariot, was a pretty horrible way to go. But if you were a very good racer, you could actually accrue a huge amount of fame and money and success doing this job. We have actually some surviving charioteers' tombstones that record essentially their career stats. And some of them have done incredibly well in terms not just of victory, but also of kind of monetary prizes. It also looks like we've got some kind of wire across the Circus Maximus and some advertising billboards, I think, going on up there. I don't know of any evidence of advertising billboards in ancient Rome. It would seem like a pretty Roman thing to do. They were always looking for a way to commercialize things, but I actually don't know that they did that. This is so bad. Okay, there are lots of things wrong with this. So first of all, the shape of the stage. It's looking awfully circular. In Roman theatres, certainly, you have a semicircular stage, and then behind that you have the scaenae frons, which is essentially the backdrop, and then you have these kind of steps of seating coming around it in a fan shape. And the reason that at the amphitheatre, the Colosseum, for example, is called an amphitheatre is because it's two theatres stuck together to make this sort of oval shape. We do see slightly more kind of circular stages, more like this in some of the earlier Greek theatres. Suddenly by the Roman period, you'd be expecting to see a much more sort of straight line down the middle with this very clear kind of backdrop, which would generally be made up of a kind of wall with columns and sort of little balconies and windows that could be decorated with statues or used in the production. We've got something incredibly strange going on here with the steps coming off the back of the stage and coming up to this temple-like structure behind. I think the place that this AI has got this idea is from the Theatre of Pompey, which is the first permanent theatre that is built in Rome. It's built by the great late Republican Dionysius Pompey the Great. During the Republic, there are laws in Rome which prohibit the building of permanent stone theatres, because theatre is seen to be an intrinsically kind of corrupting art form, and it's also incredibly popular. So it was believed that if kind of politicians build theatres, the people will allow them to become demagogues. So previously, whenever the Romans wanted to have a theatrical production, a sort of temporary wooden structure would be built to accommodate it. Pompey decides that he is going to build a theatre. And the way that he gets around the laws is that he says that this isn't a theatre. This is actually just the very circular shaped steps of this very small temple, which is right at the top here. But in Pompey's version, the steps going up to the temple make up the seats of the theatre rather than this sort of strange stepped backdrop. We also seem to be in a sort of Greek countryside landscape here. I think the AI has probably taken a lot of reference images of kind of classic ancient Greek theatres, which are very often built into the hillside because it gives you this advantage when you want to create stepped seating. And so places like Aphrodauros have these incredible kind of theatres almost cut into the mountainsides. I like the fact there are some sculptures around. The backdrop of a Roman theatre would often have been decorated with sculptures of mythological figures or gods. I like the fact that there is some wooden seating up here. There probably would have been some parts of the theatre seating that were wooden as well as stone. I'm really struggling to find things to praise here. There are also no actors. Where are the actors? Next time, I would want to see kind of main actors wearing either tragic or comic masks, and also a large group of actors that would make up the chorus. Okay, we're meant to be in the Senate, but this looks more like a sort of sci-fi dystopian, royal council. So the Senate is essentially the main deliberative body of the Roman state. It is incredibly powerful during the Republic. It is the main place where laws are made, where decisions about war and peace are taken. It becomes much less important under the Empire, of course, when most of the power transfers over to the person of the Emperor himself. I think what's important to note is that the Senate don't always meet in the same place. So there are a succession of curia, kind of Senate houses built in Rome, but the Senate can meet in any building that can accommodate it. It's just up to the presiding magistrate to decide where the meeting of the Senate is going to be held. We have lots of instances in which the Senate is recorded as meeting in temples or actually in a meeting house that is part of the Theatre of Pompey, and that is actually where Julius Caesar is assassinated. The main curia, so the main senatorial meeting house in the Forum Romanum, is burnt down in some sort of civil disorder during the late Republic. It is then rebuilt. That is a project that is started by Julius Caesar and completed by the first Emperor Augustus. And that Senate house, which is, I suppose, the most kind of iconic Senate house, is not circular like this one. It's actually sort of square, rectangular. You can still visit it. It is survived remarkably well in the Roman Forum. I'm also really not sure about the structure of these steps and the raised seating over here. There was a small platform on which the consuls and later the emperor would sit during meetings of the Senate, but I think the way they've laid it out here really makes it look like there is sort of a ruling council and then these kind of subservient members around the outside. The whole point of the Senate is that this is meant to be a body of kind of equal elite men who are going to debate things openly. There is a sort of order of precedence based on how long you've served in the Senate, what sort of magistracies you've held, but really I don't like the imbalance that we've got going on here. I'm also very, very uncomfortable with their dress. It looks like we've got some weird cultish, monastic, potentially robes going on in the group over there. And then in the figures in the foreground that are slightly more togate, we've got an awful lot of red happening. The senators would have worn white togas. And in fact, the toga candida, meaning the gleaming white toga, is associated with the kind of man who is running for office or holding office. And once you were in the Senate, you would have had a purple stripe down one side of your toga that would have designated your senatorial status. You're not going to be wearing these kind of royal red togas. The emperor would have been able to wear a full purple toga, but he was the only person to whom that honor was afforded. Okay, Vestal virgins. This looks like a year 8 sleepover where you're doing some kind of weird ritual magic. I don't know why they're essentially wearing dressing gowns. So the Vestal virgins were a group of 6 priestesses in ancient Rome. We've only got 5 here, sadly. And they served the goddess Vesta, who is the goddess of the hearth. And they were chosen between the ages of around 6 and 12, and they served for at least 30 years. During that time period, they would have to maintain their virginity, and they lived in this sort of palatial residence in the Roman Forum and attended to their religious duties. Their major religious duty was the tending of the eternal flame of Vesta. This was a flame that was lit in the Temple of Vesta in the Roman Forum, and it was believed that if the flame ever went out, that would spell utter disaster for the Roman nation. And so keeping it alive and burning was an absolutely crucial public duty. And I think this flame in the middle is obviously meant to be that eternal flame. We've got some strange sort of piled up antiquities next to it, not quite sure what is going on there. Very, very strangely decorated room. There seems to be a sort of Rococo mirror, perhaps in the background. There then seems to be a sort of Renaissance saint painting in the background here between some Egyptian-style columns, and then just some strange random basins laid out across the floor. Yeah, I've got to say I'm not a fan of this. In the corner, it looks like we potentially got a statue. Maybe it's meant to be a statue of the goddess Vesta herself. Statues were incredibly important to Roman religion. They were the sort of center of a god's cult. They were kept in the center of the temple. They were brought out for processions, and they were seen to sort of embody the god themselves. They existed in temples, but people also would have had lots of them in their own homes as well. Later religions thought that this was very idolatrous. And to go along with this praying saint, we've got all our Vestals kind of praying in this very Christian way with their hands together. That was not the sort of format of Roman religion. Roman religion was much more about kind of active ritual. So the Vestals would have been tending to the flame. They would have been making a kind of sacred type of cake that they dedicated to the goddess. They would have been arranging for processions and ceremonies that honored the goddess. And they also had a number of significant public roles because they were very trusted and they were seen to sort of embody the safety of the Roman state. They had roles in keeping very important documents safe. For example, the will of Julius Caesar was kept by the Vestal virgins. And they also had a huge number of social privileges that were not necessarily afforded to other married women, even married women of the elite. For example, they got the best seats at any theatre show or set of games. They were also able to free any prisoner that they saw. Because the Vestals were seen to be so crucial to the safety and survival of the Roman state, any slip up was very, very bad. If you let the sacred flame go out, that was obviously a horrible incursion. But also, if a Vestal was found to have lost her virginity, that was thought to spell disaster for the entirety of the Roman state, and she would be buried alive. And it's really interesting, we see these sorts of prosecutions happening a lot at times of crisis for the Roman state, particularly military crisis, and the Vestal virgins are used as these scapegoats. The man kind of drinking his drink and playing the flute one-sided out here. It's utterly bizarre. Okay, what do I like about this? I like the fact that they are reclining to eat. They should all be reclining in much more sort of formalized format. So you would have a number of couches and two people would recline on each couch, sort of like that, diagonally next to each other. There would, however, in the classic Roman dining room have been 3 couches arranged in a horseshoe shape around a table on which the food would have been laid. I'm not sure what's going on with this sort of breakfast bar arrangement that we have happening between the columns at the back. The couches would generally have been against the wall of the dining room. And if you had more decoration, that would generally have happened kind of on the walls or in front of the couches. So we have some examples from Pompeii where you have these incredibly extravagant, potentially even verging on tacky dining rooms with sort of fake rivers running through them. In terms of the decoration, we've got some columns. I can deal with them. We have this strange pot plant, which I'm not happy about in the front. And then we have sort of relief sculpture along the walls. That is not impossible. What is very problematic is the fact that this looks like ancient Egyptian relief sculpture. There is a huge fashion in Roman homes, particularly from the Augustan period onwards, for kind of Egyptian iconography. So lots of people will paint scenes of the Nile on their walls, or they will have little sort of panels with images of Egyptian gods. But you're not going to have the sort of relief sculpture that we see in Egyptian temples on your walls. The reason this sort of imagery becomes so popular is partly kind of political and partly pure fashion. So Augustus has defeated Cleopatra and taken over Egypt, and so displaying Egyptianizing iconography goes some way to demonstrating your allegiance to the new regime. It's also just seen to be incredibly exotic, incredibly beautiful. It's almost like the 18th century trend towards chinoiserie in Europe. The reason I'm so unhappy about the sort of slapdash arrangement of couches and people just kind of walking around with their plates is because the dinner party was an incredibly important part of Roman social life. Obviously, there would have been a big spectrum. Some dinner parties would have been very formalized and very serious. Other dinner parties would have really kind of degenerated into wild nights out. And there is some sort of suggestion of this with the flute player that we have over here in the side. A lot of dinner parties would have come with entertainment, so music, potentially readings, potentially dancing girls, potentially hired courtesans. And so they would all add to the sort of fun and entertainment of the evening. In terms of the food, it's obviously very hard to work out exactly what's going on here. I do like the fact that these are all kind of being displayed very performatively on these big serving platters. Food was a real way to impress your guests. How exotic were your ingredients? How impressive was your presentation? I don't like the fact that the platters are just being kind of balanced on the couches. That troubles me on a number of levels. I think we've got some sort of big pie-like thing going on here. And the Romans did enjoy sort of creating these elaborate constructions. They liked creating dishes where one thing looked like something else or one animal was stuffed inside another. Anything that demonstrated just how much money you could waste on your ingredients and just how kind of expensive a cook you could afford to hire. And these tendencies to try to impress through the throwing of banquets could get very out of hand. And in fact, it's something that's very often satirized in Roman culture, perhaps most famously in Petronius's novel, The Satyricon, in the mid-1st century AD. I do like the fact that overall this image looks very warm, very luxurious, very kind of inviting. When you look closer, it's horrible. So the next one. Okay, so now we're in a tavern. So we'd seen one extreme of elite Roman dining practices, and now we're seeing how the poorer people probably would have eaten a lot of their meals. People very often wouldn't have had good cooking facilities in their homes. A lot of the lower classes in Rome live in big apartment blocks called insulae, and you're not going to have a kitchen in your apartment, partly because there's no space, partly because that would be a fire hazard. And so you're going to have to go out to get your meals either from takeaways or from tavernas like the one that we've got here. They would have served kind of some basic meals, bread, meats, lentils, vegetables, things like that. And they would also have been places where you could have a drink, gamble a little. We have some wall paintings from Pompeii that show scenes inside taverns. They were actually also displayed on the walls of taverns, and they do show people almost exactly like this, having quite a kind of raucous time, sitting around a table, playing with dice. This would have been a really, really key part of Roman culture in perhaps the more insalubrious areas of the city. There are actually also quite a few stories about certain Roman emperors really enjoying kind of going to places like this and gambling in these sorts of dens. In terms of outfits, I think people would mainly be wearing tunics in a place like this rather than these sort of kilt-like things. This man would also certainly not have been wearing a huge watch on his wrist. The only other thing I would say is that there is absolutely not enough wine in this scene. Their glasses look either very empty or very suspiciously water-like. This is a place where, wine is really central to the activities. I actually don't hate this one. I think it really counteracts the image of the Roman Empire as being kind of made up entirely of grand colonnades and monumental fora. This is what the Roman Empire would have looked like. Well, I mean, not this weird AI version of it, but something much closer to this is what the vast majority of the Roman imperial subjects would have lived in. Okay, so that's the last one. Thank you so much for watching, for suffering through some of these images with me. I hope you've learned a little bit more about not just what things shouldn't look like, but potentially what they should have looked like. If you want more ancient history content, make sure to like and subscribe. And you can also follow me on YouTube at Ancient History Girl.